A note to listeners. The following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences.
Like as Mike said, they didn't have the personal contacts that we had today. So he basically wrote a book from, information that was just, what the public could glean at that point in time. Not even having the FBI files, not having information from like Whitey Bulger or family members. And that was the reason they wrote the book, or the movie came out the way that it did. They take the money that was given to them after they escaped, which was pretty much close to what they were going to have after the bank robbery, and they go to outside the country, and they set up the environment that they had wanted to do from the very beginning, had they not been caught for the bank robbery.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, their plan was they were leaving the country anyway. They were heading into Mexico.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman. Hi, everyone. If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts, even if it's one word.
And please subscribe to our website, www.partnersintruecrime. Follow us on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram to check out our weekly promos. We're also now on YouTube at Partners in True Crime. If you subscribe to our website, you'll be getting weekly emails from us and all kinds of promotions and things that we don't advertise on the podcast.
We appreciate all the great reviews, so please keep them coming as well. Just go on to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, drop us a review, subscribe, and tell your friends about what we're doing. Also, feel free to take pieces of the podcast, share with others. Our goal is to get the word out to as many people as possible, so thank you. Also, we are currently looking into the case of another young victim in Oklahoma, which seems very suspicious. 8 months ago, on September 4th, Noah Presgrove was 19 years old when he was found dead on a highway near Terrell, Oklahoma.
His family is still looking for answers to find out what happened in Noah's horrible death, and we are talking to them. In the coming weeks, we will be launching the What Happened to Noah Presgrove podcast, where we will go through the facts of the case with the family and try to help them find some answers. Check out announcements on Partners in True Crime for further information.
Many books have been written about the history of Alcatraz and the escape from Alcatraz, but not everyone had the true ANGLIN story. Based on what the media at the time reported, most believe that John, Clarence, and Frank never survived their escape, but did they?
Based on the work Ken and Mike have done, going through Ken's family history and newly released FBI files, along with first-hand interviews with famed mobster Whitey Bulger, there's a strong case to be made that not only did they make it off Alcatraz, but that they lived a long life after the escape.
Today we're back with Ken and Mike to talk about what others wrote about Alcatraz, and also to discuss what went on inside Alcatraz the day after their cells were found empty. All right, so we're back with Ken and Mike, episode 11, tracking through the escape from Alcatraz, following Ken's uncles for wherever they went outside of the walls and where they ended up going. But what I want to start off today with is that now that Ken and Mike has gotten Cindy us involved in this Alcatraz cult that we feel it has happened.
Welcome to the dark side.
Exactly. So we've been invited to all these Facebook groups about Alcatraz, which I had no idea there were so many, and the fascination with both the island and the escape after over 50 years is still pretty palatable, and the fact that Alcatraz was pretty much frozen in time after the escape because it closed shortly thereafter. It was kind of like the seminal moment, like the final straw which broke the camel's back. I don't know whether it was politically they decided, hey, listen, this is really not working for us anymore, or they realized that they have to transfer these guys to the mainland to a more modern facility or whatever it was. But that was the final dagger in Alcatraz back when Ken's uncles were able to, and Frank Morris were able to escape it successfully. And so I wanted to talk about a little bit about all the books that have been written about the Alcatraz escape since, you guys have been, obviously, Ken, you just started getting into this probably like 20 years ago, where your interest started to kind of flourish about this. You said you kind of was like a family thing, and then you started diving in head first, probably around the time Fred Breezy came to the house.
Yeah, it was probably maybe 20 years ago. I was pretty much on the fringes of the story. I knew a little bit about it. I knew the story from my uncles and my aunts and my mom, and I never really kind of dove into the details of it until probably about 20 years ago.
Yeah. So what did you, before you guys, obviously you guys did an enormous amount of research for this book when you were planning it out, is like, how much did you dive into all those other books that have been written about the escape, and what did you glean from it? What did they get wrong? Well, how did you have to update it? And, you know, were those good research tools for you guys to start with?
Well, you know, for me, all of the Alcatraz books that are out there right now, I think what sets ours apart from theirs is that most of the other Alcatraz books are centered around the historical piece of Alcatraz. I mean, they go into the, you know, the foundation, when it was opened, you know, from the military standpoint to where it became a federal prison, all the different individuals that came into the prison. You know, they'll eventually end it with the escape, and they cover pretty much the, you know, what everybody had always heard about the escape. You know, to me, I think probably the biggest misconception that is in every single one of the books, up until we wrote our book, was that, you know, Frank Morris was the brains behind this outfit. I don't know if some of it came from the movie itself, because that's the way the movie portrays it, or if it was just already in other books and it just made its way into the movies and then eventually into all the other books. Our book, though, really stands out because it goes back to not only just covering John and Clarence's history and how they get to Alcatraz, but it goes into a more detailed version of the escape from someone who was actually involved in the escape. You know, up until that point, all you had was, well, actually, even before the FBI reports come out, no one had any clue the detail that Alan West would give, other than if he gave another testimony outside of the FBI reports. So there's a lot of things that the books out there I would give credit to as far as the historical piece of it, but as far as the involvement of the people and the detailed piece of the escape, I think they totally have missed it. And ours brings up that new piece that the other books don't have.
Yeah. Ken, what about, I mean, Mike, what about you? I mean, obviously you live in the area, so obviously this subject matter has fascinated you for years, probably just starting with the island, and then probably more when you got into the escape, and then obviously you went into Turbo Drive when you connected with Ken. And so tell us, like, what you think of, and what did you learn from a lot of these other resources and books?
Well, as far as the other books go, I was actually very deliberate. I deliberately did not read the other books because I didn't want to borrow from other people's ideas and thoughts, because I didn't know if they were going to lead me down a wrong path. You know, for our book, we really tried to focus on primary sources whenever possible. Not to say that the other books didn't use primary sources, but we used the FBI report. We used Robert Checky's testimony, you know, from the newspapers, what he said to the reporters. We used, and invaluable was Whitey Bulger's letters that Ken said, you know, he's an eyewitness. He's friends with these people, and he's writing to Ken, this is what we said, this is what we did, this is how the plan went. So we were focusing on eyewitness testimony, and there were other inmates who in the book who were quoted as sharing their levels of participation in the escape or knowledge of it. So I wanted to use the primary sources to drive the story. And then, of course, Ken's family's recollections, the photographs, the stories, which are obviously heavily included in the book. So for me, that is where the narrative came from, was the primary sources, not what somebody else wrote, and I'm getting their interpretation of where their sources are coming from. So I didn't want to be dragged in a wrong direction that might be hard to reconcile with, like, well, in our version we have this, and so's book has that. Where do you go with that? So I just thought, I'll let the primary sources speak for themselves, and then we just tell the story the way the sources lead us to.
Good. I mean, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we do that too. It's a tough thing to do when you're creating something, especially something that's been covered before. You know, we've done documentaries on things that documentaries have been done on, and it's always a double-edged sword. I mean, do I watch it and try to figure out, you know, what they did, or do I want to have a fresh perspective, do the research, do the interviews, cover it the way we think it needs to be covered, and come up with something different. And, you know,
Yeah,
you're right.
If we read, like, say, several books, now we do quote from books. We found passages that gave us some good primary information. Like one of them was about Frank Morris talking about his mother. You know, she was a teenage mother and was unfit and, you know, abandoned him essentially, and he was raised in foster homes. Well, that was good primary source information that we wouldn't have had without this book. So there were certain sections that we used. But if we borrowed heavily with other people's books, then it's sort of a cut and paste book that we're writing, and we're just relying on them to do the work for us. And it's like, well, you got all your information from other books, so why is your book any different, kind of a thing. So we wanted to stay away from that temptation.
Yeah. You want to?
No, I agree. I do the same thing. I don't like to get influenced by other people's work when I'm working on something like this, especially when there's so much primary. You guys had a lot of primary resources. So I think you were lucky in that respect that you could just kind of, you had that, and you have Ken and his family and their recollection of things. I mean, I think
because that's what we do. Like when we do in documentaries, if it's involved with any kind of family or something like that, that's where we want to go first.
Yeah.
We want to interview family members. We want to interview people connected to, if it's a true crime case, people are, you know, connected to the case, people surrounding the case, relatives, cousins, friends, all those, because that's the untapped information that you, and the unfiltered information that you're going to get.
But I also think with this particular story, everybody saw the movie and just assumed that that was true and that was it. And
Right.
that's what I loved about talking to you guys, is that there were so many things I had no idea. I didn't know any of this. And there's a lot of people who were reaching out to us going, I had no idea any of that stuff happened. And everybody just has that one track about this story.
And, you know, even from the movie, I spoke to the guy who wrote the screenplay for that movie, and I asked him what his inspiration was. And he told me that he was basically kind of struggling to get something out into Hollywood, writing something. And he was out on the island doing a tour, and he came by the bookstore and he picked up a book about the escape, and he read it. And he said, oh, I could make a movie out of this. And so he even wrote the movie based upon someone who wrote a book back in the 70s, which, like, as Mike said, they didn't have the personal contacts that we had today. So he basically wrote a book from, you know, information that was just, you know, what the public could glean at that point in time, not even having the FBI files, not having information from like Whitey Bulger or family members. And that was the reason they wrote the book, or the movie came out the way that it did.
Yeah. And we're talking like almost 40 years ago that movie came out. It was like 1979.
Yeah, 79, the movie 79. Came out. And the other thing that he had said to Ken was, because Ken also asked him, well, why did you pick Frank Morris, you know, to be the head guy, you know, of the escape, the brains? And he said, well, I only had one. I had a big name actor, Clint Eastwood. So if Clint Eastwood's the star, it can't be one of the brothers. So that left Frank Morris. So he just made it Frank Morris, just out of necessity.
I figured that's what happened, because how is it's Clint Eastwood? Who's he going to compete with?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And you write to what you have available to you. That's true. Like whether it's location, whether it's an actor.
And to be fair, I mean, it's a great movie.
It
Clint
is.
Eastwood is amazing.
It is.
I mean, he's phenomenal. You know, we love Clint Eastwood. He's
phenomenal. Well, and the benefit of the movie is, you know, we don't want to keep, you know, saying, oh, the movie's, you know, we hate the movie. It's I love the movie. I think it's very well done. Clint does, you know, as usual, his phenomenally good, you know, good acting job. And the major benefit is, you know, it put it on the radar of everybody. They can watch the movie today. The interest of Alcatraz, I think, is largely because of the movie. You know, if the movie came out, I don't know if Alcatraz Island would necessarily be as popular. I know, because when I went in, I think it was 81, that's when I first visited the island. That was only a couple of years after the movie. Well, at the time, when you went on the tour, they would point out the cell that's the one that Clint Eastwood used, and they had to paint it to make it look a lot newer. You know, that it was, you know, that, you know, the island was still in use. So they were very proud of the fact that the movie was, you know, filmed there, of course, and we're pointing out the places where they shot the movie. So that really ratcheted up the interest in Alcatraz that is still going on today.
Yeah, and then you also had other movies borrowing from your brother's escapes, because, like, if you look at Shawshank, the way they dug in that cell and how they used the vent, And had they covered up the thing with pictures, they didn't use paintings, but they used posters of female movie stars throughout the years as he was digging. So it was like there was a lot of taken from that. I think that Frank Darabont probably was inspired by the Alcatraz escape and how they did it, because he did it almost exactly the same way.
Right.
You know, the only difference is that he didn't have to. He wasn't on an island. He had to escape through a sewage pipe. You know, it's like, you know.
Right.
So, but I thought there was a lot of parallels there to the storytelling of the escape from that movie and the Clint Eastwood one. But
well, I don't know if you saw Loki on the Disney Channel, but there's actually a moment where he goes to the escape, the Alcatraz escape. It's not a big part of the story, but it is included in the story. So, I mean, it's and then of course they have, you know, the escape from Alcatraz triathlon, which is directly inspired by the escape.
Right.
They swim, you know, the first leg is the swim back to San Francisco. So, you know, the whole escape, you know, milieu has reached pop culture status where it's just part of the vocabulary of when you say Alcatraz, everyone knows what you're talking about.
Yeah. But I do think, and that this is going to be our effort too, is I think there needs to be a movie or a TV show that really updates this story, and that's what we're working on. So people, if you want to stand by, that's what we're trying to make happen.
It needs to be, because like I said, people are reaching out every single day having no idea the parts of the story that were true that no one knows about. And I think that, honestly, if I was a young actor, I'd want to play this part.
Oh yeah.
Well, we've got comments from people either directly personally or, you know, on the Amazon site or on our Facebook page or website kind of thing. And it's like, oh, you guys, this would be a great movie. You should make it into a movie. Like,
Absolutely.
oh, we hadn't thought about
It's gonna happen.
It's happening.
I believe it's going to happen.
Yeah, we're working on it. It's happening.
We're making it happen.
What glaring things were put out there originally about this story, Ken and Mike, that you want to clarify that aren't true?
I would probably just say, you know, the biggest thing that I really got me going on this search was the fact that someone put John and Clarence, my uncles, into this subcategory that, you know, really someone who really didn't have a whole lot of part in the escape. And so to me, I think the biggest story that I really wanted to get out was not only to introduce John and Clarence to the public, that they were just not prisoners, and that they were men who had moms and dads and brothers and sisters and girlfriends, and they had dreams just like everybody else did, but they were also very intelligent. And you know, when you go and you look and you see, it wasn't Frank Morris who planned this whole thing. It was John Anglin. And to me, that was the one piece of evidence that I wanted to get across to people. Was, you know, I didn't want people thinking of my uncles as they're portrayed in the movie with Clint Eastwood as, you know, some dumb farm hicks that were lucky to be invited by Frank Morris, who was the brains behind this thing. So to me, this to me is a way of telling their story for them and letting people know that no, it wasn't Frank Morris. It was actually John and Clarence, who pretty much put this whole thing together. Who, you know, Frank Morris was a part of it. He was definitely a key player, but he was not the brains behind this.
Yeah, I mean, you can, when you read the book and you see from the beginning, and you kind of chart their childhood and what they were doing and how they did it and how they were so resourceful and how they were, you know, mischievous kids, but they just wanted what a lot of the other kids had. They just felt deprived. And you see what they were able to make of themselves in such a short period of time. You know, unfortunately, they did have to steal in order to get some of that stuff that they wanted, and it just kind of escalated. But still, to do that and be able to get away with those things, and they, you know, short of the, you know, the way they got caught for the bank robbery, I mean, they had someone on the inside who knew about it, that blew the whistle on them, that had a grudge against them. Personal grudge, because of, you know, we talked a little bit about that, but short of that, they wouldn't have gotten caught. And I think, you know, and I think after that bank robbery, who knows? I mean, they had what was like, how much? It was like 19,000, you said?
I think it was 19,000.
19,000. I mean, they could have started their own businesses at that point. They could have gone on the straight and narrow. There was no telling because that's what they wanted. I mean, they had their girls, they had the people that they wanted to share life with and who they wanted to marry and start families with. So it wasn't look like they were looking long term to be bad guys and being there. They wanted to make money so they could actually support themselves and support the families that they were going to eventually grow. So, I mean, you really kind of get a 360 dimension of what kind of people they really were and what motivated them, as opposed to just guys who just escaped prison. Because we all have a backstory. Some are worse than others. I mean, they didn't have a bad backstory. They had a very caring, loving family with a lot of loving siblings. You know, they had 14 kids. I mean, it's like, didn't seem like that they had a poverty, but they didn't, it wasn't like Frank Morris, who came from a, screwed up background in childhood, and, his mom coming and going and him being in foster homes and all that kind of stuff. So it's like they came from good people. And I think the core value is what you've displayed. And obviously, it doesn't, you're part of their DNA. I mean, your DNA has gone on and lived life and flourished and had families. And, I mean, it's not like there was like a family of criminals in your family. It was like you had these two outliers who just happened to get caught up in all of this. And who knows what would have happened if they didn't meet Mickey Cohen. I mean, they might have been in and out of prison for something else, but I don't think they would have made it to that level.
Well, I think just the fact that how they wound up, their life story ends up in Brazil, and they take the money that was given to them after they escaped, which was pretty much close to what they were going to have after the bank robbery, and they go to outside the country, and they set up the environment that they had wanted to do from the very beginning, had they not been caught for the bank robbery. Mm-hmm. I mean, their plan was they were leaving the country anyway. They were heading into Mexico.
So let me stop you right there, because that's something I haven't heard before, is that when they got some cash, some, to take with them to kind of start a new life. Who was that a Mickey Cohen gift?
Well, yes. So, after the escape, the money that they had when they got on the plane, according to what Breezy said that John told him, when they got to the shore and they got off the boat, waiting for them was a new change of clothes. They had new IDs and they had money in their pocket. And so from that point, we know that they were already set up. This was part of what Mickey Cohen financed. And they board the plane and head to Mexico. It's just, to me, I think it was the exact plan that they were going to do after they robbed the bank. They had their girlfriends. Their plan, if they had not gotten caught after the bank robbery, was heading to where they were eventually heading to after the escape, which was into Mexico. And then eventually, they're forced into Brazil. But just that, what we were talking about, what kind of character they had. I mean, they didn't go back into this life of crime. I mean, if they had been, they would have been arrested in another country. So clearly they went down, they had the money that they needed to start their new life, and then they started their new life, and they turned their life around. They married, had kids, and had a great life.
So to me, though, if Mickey Cohen is basically giving them, like you said, almost the same amount that they took from the bank. Right. I mean, that to me, it's like, is he investing in them? Because like, you don't take money from the mob unless they want something from you. So it's like, it's not, there's no gifts in the mob. So it's quid pro quo for everything.
Well, for Mickey, I believe when they originally had their contract with him, they were going to be delivering him marijuana. His operation that was in Los Angeles, they were going to be supplying the drugs across the border back to his base in America, which was going to be distributed throughout the country. I mean, they were going to be a key part of that. But after Mickey gets caught, he realizes his operation is in jeopardy. And, whether or not he was going to be able to carry this out or not is to be seen. Him financing this escape and giving them the cash that they needed, it was either another part of this plan that we throw out some speculations as far as why he did what he did, or whether or not he was going ahead and setting them up with this contract that he originally was going to set them up with from the very beginning, which was they were going to go to his farm, they were going to run that farm, they were going to grow marijuana and was going to export that product back into the United States. Whether or not he really believed that he was going to be able to continue that after he got out, I'm not sure. But when you really kind of look at, and this is what's so amazing about this Alcatraz story, is not so much about what happened during the escape and the planning that went on, but it's the just bizarre things that happened after the escape that start making me think that there was way more to this escape than what most people realize. That, Mickey Cohen's involvement, the way that the federal government reacted to the escape, the things that they allowed to occur, the things that they allowed not to occur, just throws this weird light onto this escape and makes you think that there was more to it than just John Clarence and Frank Morris.
I'm sure there was. I'm sure there was. What did you want to say there?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, just the fact that he gave them almost the same exact amount of money that they stole from the bank. Right. To me, that is like, is it basically an FU to the people that put him in jail in the first place? Like, okay, I'm going to give them this amount of money. I mean, I just think there's a lot of politics going on here behind the scenes that we're not privy to, that we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, just the whole story about Mickey Cohen, when we first learned about Mickey and his involvement, I mean, how my Uncle Man even knew Mickey Cohen just blew my mind. But then as you started digging into the brothers going out to California to meet him, the amount of money that they came back with, I mean, they basically go out to California with nothing. And they come back home with all this cash, brand new cars, brand new clothes. Their lifestyle totally goes a 180. And, it's just, I mean, you start looking at all these kind of like factors, these mysterious things that happen. And then you get into Mickey Cohen and he gets, thrown into Alcatraz, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, of all people, is the ones who signed his bond to get out of Alcatraz. I mean, just that alone ought to throw this light of suspicion on what the heck is going on here. I mean, why would a Supreme Court justice even do something like that?
I don't know. It's very confusing. But I think we could kind of transition and segue into, they're off the island. They're heading to Mexico City, getting ready to gas up. I think that's where we left off last week. And what's happening back at Alcatraz? So let's talk a little bit about the blowback and the aftermath and the craziness that's going on and the mad scramble for finding answers, because it looked like they were just when did they discover that they were gone? First of all.
Yeah, so it would have been 7:00 in the morning, when they were getting ready to do the head counts. But, what is so nice about our book is we have an eyewitness person that is there during this time frame. And, he basically describes 2 points of chaos that was occurring. Because as soon as the guards discover what has happened, they go 7:00, everybody's supposed to stand up in front of their cells. They're going to be counted. And, the guard is walking by, and of course you have 3 prisoners that are not standing up, and, he's reaching in to, hey, get up, tap him on the head. And that's when he realizes that they're fake heads and these men are escaped. Well, all chaos starts erupting at that point in time. I mean, you got the guards screaming because, one, they don't know what's going on. Now you got all of the prisoners, according to Whitey Bulger, that are just up on, standing up, screaming, hollering. So you got all this chaos that is going on. And the guards are trying to figure out what the heck has happened, because they didn't know what had just happened. And you got all the prisoners, they're trying to quiet them down. Someone undoubtedly, has already flipped the switch for the sounding the alarm. I can just imagine what the people at the wharf in San Francisco was thinking. I mean, because I'm sure as the prisoners used to be able to hear, music going on the island, on the mainland, that people on the mainland probably heard every bit of this going on. They probably heard the sirens go off. They probably heard the commotion that was going on. And then all you see, can you imagine all the boats that are streaming to the island? And then you got helicopters and you've got everybody, everybody's probably going, what in the world is going on in Alcatraz? I mean, it was probably total chaos. And that's exactly how Whitey described it. I mean, he said it was total chaos. Prisoners were screaming, their guards were screaming, the main warden is not even there. He's off on a fishing trip. So they're probably on the phone to him, trying to wake him up. You need to get back to the island. They're in touch with the FBI, I'm assuming, because the FBI has a field office there in San Francisco. I could just imagine what it was, total chaos. And here John Clarence and Frank Morris are landing in, Mexico, probably sipping a cup of coffee and probably just thinking about the chaos and what was going on at that time. But,
yeah, I'm sure it was pretty.
What it was like.
I'm sure it was pretty jubilant with all the other inmates. They're probably like, they made it, they got out, or at least they got out of the prison. Whether or not they survived, I don't know if they knew about that. So, but at least they caused enough chaos for the prison to really allow them to celebrate that they're not there.
I can imagine the whole island went in lockdown mode. I mean, you got to remember that all these guards and their families and kids are still there. So everybody went into a lockdown mode. And so, because one, you don't know if they're still on the island. All they know is they're not in their cells. They have no clue what happened to them. All they know is they're not in their cells. And so, I'm sure there was a scramble search, trying to search the island just to make sure they were not still there. And I remember Whitey said that they locked every single person down in their cells. No one was allowed to leave. I'm not sure. I don't remember. Mike, did you remember if he said that they brought breakfast to them? No. They were allowed to go to breakfast, but they were not allowed to do anything else.
Yeah. So what happened was, I just want to go back a little bit when the guards, everyone comes out for head count, because you had to stand in front of your cell when they opened the doors, and then they would do the quick head count. And then they would, by cell block and by tier, they bring them to the dining hall for breakfast, in groups. And then of course you have 3 cells where the inmates are not coming out. And so the first cell that they go to is John's, and the guard tries to roust him awake, thinking he's still asleep. Well, his head falls off, rolls onto the floor, and he thinks. And he jumps back and screams because he thought somebody cut off John's head, that there was some kind of a inmate vendetta. And then they go to Morris's next, and it's the same thing. And that's when they realize, they're dummy heads, that they're out of the cells, that they had escaped. And then, so, there's a lot of chaos. Like Ken said, there's guards going back and forth. They're they don't know what's going on, that they got out. Well, they decided to let them go to the dining hall to have breakfast, a very quick breakfast, I'm sure, eat in 10 minutes. And then they put them back to their cells, and they were locked down for the rest of the day. And then, of course, the FBI is immediately notified. And then also Owen Blackwell, who was, I think he was in Napa on vacation with his wife and his daughter, he's called, and he immediately returns. The FBI takes over the investigation of where are they, and they immediately start sending out the guards. The Coast Guard is brought in, the helicopters are brought in, and they basically, Clifford Fish, who was one of the guards, said that morning because he was off the island at the time, by the time he got to the island, he was told very quickly what had happened. And he was partnered with another guard, and they said they just put him on a boat, and they said, just go search, just go look for him, go look for bodies, go look for a raft. They were told about the raft at the time. So the guards knew that there was a raft. That's how they got off the island, most likely because of a very quick interrogation of Alan West, because he admitted very quickly that he was a part of the escape, but he didn't make it out, of course. So he gives some preliminary information to the guards and then later the FBI, but it's a scramble. They don't know where to look. They don't know where to go. So they lock up the inmates. They start searching the island frantically. They're looking in the caves. They're looking all around the island, anywhere you can possibly hide. And then eventually they start setting up teams to start scouring the bay, both from above in the helicopters and then through the boats. They're looking just looking anywhere and everywhere they can as they're trying to coordinate their activities. And then the FBI is starting to do interviews with the inmates to try to get information as quickly as possible to try to get leads of where they should be searching.
Kooky. What a crazy Chinese fire drill they were going through.
Yeah, it was crazy panic because they didn't know where to go because they knew they had. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention is Charles Herman, who we brought up before. Whitey Bulger referred to him as Herman the German. That was sort of their nickname for him, and it wasn't a compliment that they didn't think very highly of him. Well, he was the guard that night on duty. He got off duty at 12 o'clock, and he was supposed to do a head count before he got off duty. And he had signed off because when you did different things, you had to sign off on these things to show that you're on top of your duties. Well, he signed off that night saying that he did do a head count. Well, it was later discovered that he had not done it because he was behind in his rounds, the different tasks that were required of the guards during their shift. He was behind. And so he didn't actually not look for them. He didn't actually do head counts before he signed off that night. He just said that he did. And he was later reprimanded and given 30 days no pay. That was his punishment. And he was the only guard that was punished for the escape. No other guard had any kind of negative reprimand or anything in their record that said that they had done anything wrong. Only Charles Herman was, and that was because he didn't do the head count. Now, had he done the head count that night, although I don't think he probably would have discovered the dummy heads because they had left approximately 9:45. That's when they started working their way to the top of the cell block. So, 2 hours or so later, when Officer Herman was doing the head counts, I think he would have just sort of walked by and saw, hey, there's somebody in there, I'm going to keep walking. But they still kind of blamed him for not doing his job because had he discovered that night at around midnight they were missing, there was a possibility they could have caught him.
Yeah, but they had already used the heads multiple nights before.
Yes. So,
the possibility that he was going to walk by and go, oh, there's a head in the bed, and that's not a human being.
Probably not.
He would have walked by and just would not have seen it. What he might have seen, though, would have been Alan West, because Alan never got out of his cell until a little later. He was in the process of digging out of his cell by himself, which to me that is a strange incident in itself. I mean, we talked about how this was a two-person team. It's one of the reasons why Alan West invited Frank Morris into the plan. He needed someone to watch for him while he dug, and he in turn would watch for them while they dug. Well, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers have already left, and he's still continuing to dig, even though he has no one to let him know, hey, there's a guard coming. So, it's very possible if Herman had walked by, he would have seen Alan West, and that would have triggered something right there. But with him not doing that pretty much sealed the deal. So,
and I'm sure Alan would have flipped in a heartbeat if they caught him. Based upon everything you guys tell me about this guy, this character, well, if I'm not getting out, no one else is getting out.
I asked that question I think I mentioned this one time before in one of our podcasts. I asked that question to Whitey Bulger because I said, here are everybody in Alcatraz that knew about the escape, that was pulling for these men, including yourself. What would you have done to Alan West? What would have happened to Alan West had they have known that he talked to the FBI and gave them information that would have got them caught? What would have happened to Alan West? And he said he would have survived 5 seconds in the yard.
Yeah, I remember.
And he said exactly what we told him to say. I think it was, I'm not sure he would have ratted about. I believe he had a story that he was told to tell, and that's what he told.
What about Mickey Cohen? I mean, is there anything in the FBI files where they questioned him as well?
all of the inmates that they interviewed are redacted. So, I mean, they had to, the names of who they were talking to, they had to have spoken to Mickey Cohen.
Because I'm sure they knew that Mickey worked with John in the room with the laundry room or the clothes room.
Early on, I'm sure they did, but early on they had no clue what had happened. You know, all they knew is 3 men were gone. They knew that they had dug out the back of the cell, and they knew they had built a raft, but I don't think they fully knew what the details of the plan were. As far as like who helped, I'm not sure they really knew Mickey Cohen was involved in it at that point. At some point in time, they do find out about it, but I think I'm not sure that they knew when they first interviewed him. I'm not sure, just like as the FBI came to my grandparents' home the next morning and interviewed the family members, they didn't realize that Uncle Man, who was sitting right in front of them, was the one who coordinated everything with Mickey. And, they didn't realize what they had in their hands at that point in time. Yeah. So much later they do, and he's one of the reasons why they polygraphed him several times. But to me, though, that next morning, when all chaos is breaking loose, all the sirens are going off, they've already called the FBI, the Army is there, the Coast Guard's there, the newspaper now is starting to report it, the TV stations, and you have Officer Chechi. I mean, he gives it in his testimony. He wakes up the next morning, he sees this on the news, and he immediately calls his supervisor and tells him what he saw. They in turn immediately call the FBI. So that very day, the FBI is notified, hey, we've got someone who saw something that might be very important to this escape and the route that they took. Who in their right mind would not, especially in investigations they do today? I mean, we all know that the first few hours, the first few days are very important, of catching. If you're going to catch someone or find someone, those first few hours are very important. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are the key times when people are going to remember stuff exactly how it happened. And here you got an eyewitness to this boat, and they're dismissing it. They go out, they interview him. They basically over the next few days accuse him of, why didn't you swim out there and stop it? or why didn't you pick up your phone up and call someone? And then eventually they just almost kind of made it sound like he was a part of it, like they were actually investigating him.
I'm not surprised. That doesn't
it's
surprise
like blows your mind as to, okay, I thought we were trying to catch 3 escapees, not blame a San Francisco police officer not doing his job.
Yeah.
And they had to blame somebody, right? Because otherwise it makes them look ridiculous. That how did these 3 men get off this island in the middle of the San Francisco Bay? I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Under everybody's nose.
How did they do it, right? I mean, I would feel like, oh my God, how did I not see this? Like, they must have been going crazy when this happened. So I'm not surprised that they would blame the one person who's like, yeah, I saw them.
I saw what might be. I mean, he wasn't saying that he saw what he saw. Like,
I saw a boat leave.
All he was saying, hey, I saw a boat out in the between San Francisco and the island, and it was very suspicious around the same time frame. I mean, why would you not want to go out and investigate this?
Well, how would he have known either at that time, though? He wouldn't have known that people had escaped at that point because nobody knew. No. So of course they have to point the finger at somebody. I mean that.
Well, one of the, and we talked about this before, that for Officer Checky, he was feeling like we can try and find this boat, that it's probably, or it's likely it's somewhere around the Bay Area. They pick them up, they go to a port somewhere in the Bay Area, and then the 3 escape. And if we can find the boat, that can give us some clues of maybe where to start looking for them. Right. And he's trying to tell the FBI, we got to find the boat. We got to start looking for. And so they interview him for several days. And then in the end, one of the officers, FBI agents, turns to the other and says, we need to bury this thing inexplicably. Well, finally, he's so frustrated that he goes to the newspaper, it was the Oakland Tribune, I believe, and he does an interview about 7 days after the escape, telling them his story, saying, it's a white boat. It was in the middle of the bay. I think it had something to do with the escape. And it was only at that point that the FBI finally reluctantly starts doing a search of the boats in the different marinas around the bay. out of
And
more
it's-
out of shame than out of, you know, urgency.
And it's the very first time that James Bennett, who is director of the federal prisons, who I believe, you know, is trying to insert himself into this investigation. The FBI, there's documents that I found where the FBI wrote notes about James Bennett and said, why is he sharing this information? How did he know this information? He's jeopardizing the case. They didn't want him talking to the public. They didn't want him sharing stuff, but he interjects himself into this interview that this newspaper person does with Officer Chechi. They undoubtedly go and they talk to whoever wrote the article, talks to some of the special agents that were investigating, and also James Bennett. Well, this is the first time he ever makes the comment about a boat. He makes the comment of, well, the Anglin family were very poor farmers. They had no means in any way to hire and put a boat in the water for several weeks, anticipating when the escape was going to occur. So he pretty much dismissed the boat right off the bat. You know, now whoever wrote this article also interviewed 2 special agents, and you can see almost there is a disconnect between the agents and the people that ran the FBI and the officials, because these 2 agents are quoted as saying that the boat held a lot of credibility and it backed up their theory that someone had supplied a boat for them. So early on, the people that were in the field doing this work, they suspected this, but yet the people that's, you know, running the FBI and the upper management, they wanted to bury the story. They didn't want it to even come out. Yeah. So you go, why is this happening?
Hubris. It's the hubris. You know, it's like they wanted to bury it. They want to say they never made it out of the bay, because if there was a boat involved, then that'll conflict with the narrative of them drowning in the bay.
And then you have Cliff Fish. Okay, so he's an Alcatraz guard. He, as Mike said, and this backs up something that Whitey Bulger said. You know, he said that we were locked in our cells for several days. We were not allowed to leave. You know, Cliff Fish gives the account. We have it on tape, how that, you know, and we talked about how many guards to prisoners there were. So there were a good number. And they get out that same day of the escape, and they're standing around with nothing to do. In fact, Cliff Fish says we were cleaning toilets, and he'll eventually, he goes to his supervisor and say, hey, we want to help. I want to do something. And so they tell him, go take one of the prison boats and, you know, go ride around, see what you can see. So he grabs another guard, which is he calls him Olaf. I'm not sure if he was a guard or what he did on the island. Maybe he drove one of the boats, but he tells the story. You know, they go out and they go, well, everybody's looking over here. Why don't we go over here and look? So they're trying to look in a place that hasn't been searched yet. And Olaf, I guess familiar with the bay and the currents and stuff, said, well, you know, if it was me, I would have gone this direction. And so they go over to what he calls the Raccoon Straits, which is over near Angel Island. And they're riding around, and all of a sudden he said, you know, gosh, what is that over there on the bank? And so they pull up, and it's the raft. Well, actually they call it a boat, and it's just there where it freaks them out, because they're not like, you know, Cliff is going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? You know, these men might be here on the island. So he was like, well, and he talks about how scared he was, but he grabs his gun and he gets out of the boat and he walks over to the raft and he walks around it, and then he goes into the woods to see if he could, you know, if they're still there. And in a few minutes he comes back and he says, well, there's no one here, didn't find anybody. So he gets back on the boat and they say, well, we need to take the boat with us, because Olaf, and this is kind of key, said if we don't take it with us, the same current that drove it up onto the beach is going to take it somewhere else. So they take a rope and they tie to it. They don't pull it into their boat. It's large enough that they tie to it, and they pull it all the way back to Alcatraz. He said when they got to the docks, there was a telephone pole that was in the water that I guess boats could tie up to. He said they tied the boat to the telephone pole. They went inside. They told their superiors what they had found. They sent them off to work, never asked them any other questions. No one came and talked to them. He said when we left that evening, the boat was still tied up at the docks around the telephone pole.
Was it still inflated?
It was still inflated. They go home, and when he said the next morning when they came back, the boat was gone. The FBI never interviewed them, never asked anything. No one ever asked them a word about what happened to that boat, nor how they found it, anything else about the boat.
That's weird. But that photograph that we have that you sent us with the boat there, where is that? Is that on Angel Island, or is that when they just brought it back up onto shore? Because there's several cops around there.
That photo is actually like a recreation that someone had done. But what is really striking is that in 2012, the U.S. Marshal that I was working with then, Michael Dykes, he found this memo where it was recorded by the FBI that they had found the boat, they found the raft. And he sent me a copy. Well, shortly after he sent me a copy, and I have it today, he was told to pull it down, that was not supposed to have been released. In fact, no one, from what I understand, actually has another copy of it except me, because I happen to keep it. I kept everything. But inside of it, in the memo, it says raft found on Angel Island and footprints found leading away from the raft into the woods. Well, isn't that the same thing that Cliff Fish? I just said that Cliff Fish did.
Yes.
Yep.
They undoubtedly took that boat back to wherever it was originally found and left it there so the FBI could get it. And those footprints are Cliff Fish's footprints.
Now, there's another couple of things to bring to the boat issue. There's an APB report that we have in our book, where it says very emphatically that the raft was found on Angel Island. And also Whitey Bulger in his letters sent to Ken said that the next morning on the 12th, that it was common knowledge among the inmates that they had found a boat on the island. So undoubtedly when Cliff Fish and Olaf, whoever he was, came back with the raft and tied it off, the guards were talking amongst themselves and most likely about what they had found, probably comparing notes, trying to figure out what's still going on. And the inmates probably overheard them talking, and it just spread very quickly that the raft had been found and it was intact. It wasn't deflated. It wasn't, it didn't break apart in the middle of the bay. It wasn't in pieces. It was still seaworthy. And then also interesting, in the FBI report, it goes out of its way to say that they had sent the National Guard to Angel Island as one of the possible destinations, because when they had done the interview with Alan West, he said that when they broke out, they were going to go to Angel Island. That's where they were headed. So, and it's just a mile and a half away. And so you don't even need Alan West's testimony or his confession to search there, because it's so close. That's a likely place anybody would go if you tried to escape Alcatraz. And it says that the National Guard went on the beach, went on the island, looked everywhere, didn't find any evidence whatsoever that they made it there. There was nothing there that they found, no footprints, no raft, no clothes or anything that they had been there. And so they left and started searching elsewhere. So the FBI report says very clearly they did not make it to Angel Island, no evidence they ever reached it. But we have 3 other sources on our side that says that they did find the raft.
Yeah. Well, it was clear from, if you look at, if they boarded that boat, which was in between Alcatraz and the marina, and as the tide is, going out at that point, it's going out up under the Golden Gate Bridge, heading out into the ocean. If they had released that boat right there, if they just got into, onto the boat and their rest of their gear and their raft was left in the water, the currents would have taken it out close to the Golden Gate, and it wasn't too long after that the current changes, right? And it starts coming back in. Well, they've done studies. I've seen studies done that if you drop something up under the Golden Gate Bridge and the currents are coming in, it will wind up over close to Angel Island. That's just the way that the current goes. It's a larger body that the water would flow around that island. And Olaf, that was what was to me so key in that testimony of Cliff Fish, is because Olaf realized that the boat wasn't there because that's where they came ashore at. The boat was there because the currents had pushed it up there.
After they dumped it.
Because that's the reason why he tells Cliff Fish. He says, we need to take this boat with us, because if we don't, the same currents, this is his words, the same currents that put it there will move it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So he realized that, one, that's not where they came ashore at. That was just where the boat ended up at after the currents got through with it.
Right, because if they came ashore, there would have been footprints, there would have been evidence, there would have been something
there.
There
would have been something there.
They just disappeared off of the raft. If there was a shark, the shark would have destroyed the raft.
Well,
so
one thing that Cliff Fish also said, that when they first got to the beach, because they sort of, the boat that they were on, the transport, they just sort of kind of beached it a little bit. And so it's at the edge of the water, and they're discussing, okay, what do we do now? Now we found the raft, so they must be here somewhere, or likely here, I should say. And so Cliff decides, Olaf's going to stay with the boat. Cliff is going to go on the island. He produces his revolver, like Ken said, and he examines the raft, and that's when he describes the blood that's at the bottom of the raft. There was a lot of blood, because there was water and blood mixed together. Mm-hmm. So he said it was like somebody had killed a pig. It was that much blood in the raft. So something had happened. And that there were no footprints. And he thought that was very peculiar, that there were no footprints on the beach. Because he said that, the tide, the water doesn't go that high on the beach. The raft had beached, but you go a little further up, well, the water doesn't reach there. So if they had jumped out of the boat, the raft, there would be evidence of it, but he still had to investigate. And then he realized when he was getting closer to the woods, to the wooded area, if they were there, he was a dead man. They would have jumped him and killed him. And he thought, this is kind of dumb of me being by myself in a secluded area with 3 presumably dangerous escaped inmates who want to survive. Yep. And he looked a little bit, and then he got back to the boat, and then that's when they decided to tow it back to Alcatraz.
Just sounds like the FBI was everybody in the government, when stuff like that happens, they got to control the narrative, because they're going to have to answer to the public. But back then, the FBI was very powerful back then. Not that it's not powerful today, but under J. Edgar, it was a formidable institution, and what he was the king of the castle. He had blackmail on everybody in Washington, everybody all over the country. So a lot of people were afraid of him. So probably what he says went, and he says, well, we have to I would imagine his office is like, we got to make this go away, and as fast as way possible, because it was a huge embarrassment to both the government, the FBI, and the fact that they discontinued that officer's statement. Why would you do that? Other than if you're trying to, but to those other FBI's credit, they said that it was a valuable lead too, but that wasn't public. This is all stuff that you had to dig. And, right. We deal with this on a daily basis too, investigating, murders and crimes and dealing with law enforcement. There's a lot of great law enforcement out there, but at the same point, they don't want to look foolish. And their first instinct is to hold on to information right away and not share it, because they want to preserve the integrity of the case. But in this case, you have 2 or 3, felons on the loose that just escaped pretty much a maximum security prison on an island. I would think you would want to get that message out to the public as quickly as possible, unless they were so certain that they didn't make it and that they died in the water. And the only way they didn't think, and then this boat theory that comes out the next day from that officer, that San Francisco PD guy, kind of throws a monkey wrench into that and can cause a lot of problems.
Right. Well, and that's exactly what happened, because 2 days after the escape, they find the pouch floating in the water. It's found by one of the Army boats. So they're dredging the water with, according to this, like a net, pulling, debris. It's a debris net. It's they said about 3 feet down in the water. But when they find this pouch and they cut it open and they realize, hey, these are letters. There's letters, there's photos. Like I said, I'm in one of the photos. But there are pieces of information, pieces of paper that are people's addresses and phone numbers that might look like it's, contact information. James Bennett, right after it's reported, he comes out and says, well, this is the reason why we believe that they drowned, because this undoubtedly was a very important piece of material or item that they were taking with them, but they wouldn't have just tossed it into the water, haphazardly. Something happened. Undoubtedly, they all drowned, and this is evidence of it. So, like you said, early on, they started saying this. James Bennett said it. Olin Blackwell's reported saying it in the newspaper. The FBI didn't say it. They're the ones who started saying it. And the FBI recorded it down because they gave interviews. Every time they gave an interview to a newspaper, they recorded this down. So it wasn't like they were talking to James Bennett and he tells the FBI he's telling a newspaper. So it's already started spreading now that, these men didn't make it. They drowned early on. So like you said, here comes a police officer saying, well, I've got something that's a little different. I think they did make it. Well, now the story is out that they didn't make it. So I can definitely see how they're trying to cover this up. We don't want any other story other than they drowned.
Yeah. And we know that, government it's self-preservation and it's
right.
PR and, I don't know if you're familiar, and this is going off on a tangent, but the whole Benghazi thing. It's like you hear that story and there's so many stories that they want to kind of overlap and cover up. And, we know some people that actually were there and experienced it, and they're not happy the way that story was told. So I can see that happening just to save face and people's jobs too. That guy Bennett, what happened to him after all this?
That's an interesting story. I don't know what eventually happens to James Bennett. The research that I did on him up until for the Alcatraz piece of it, I do know like I said, he was the director of the federal prisons at that time. So Olin Blackwell reported to him, and he undoubtedly at some point in time reported to somebody else, but I'm not sure who it was. But you still have to ask yourself, the question is that you go back to Mickey Cohen. If Mickey Cohen was granted by a Supreme Court justice to get out of prison for 7 months, and then for whatever reason, why would you, if you're out and you have any suspicion that you're not going to make this, you're not going to make your case, why would you come back?
Yeah.
They tried to tell him, leave the country. He had the money to leave the country. They had no way of tracking him. He could have been free, So to me, there's something else being in play here. Something that I think a lot of people overlook in the story when you start reading this. So Supreme Court justice lets him out and he comes back to Alcatraz. The escape occurs just a few weeks afterwards. And now all these high officials, the head of the FBI and people like that, they're trying to downplay the escape. They're looking at all the different places that the lower, people in the FBI, the field agents, the public is trying to tell them, well, this is what we found, and they're ruling it out. They're saying, no, that's not what happened. We're going to go with this story. Why? Why are they trying to do this in such a way that they want you to believe they either drowned or they went north? Because if you look at most of the interviews that they do with the public, that I say eyewitness accounts, it's all in the northern part of the U.S., none in the southern part.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow they're directing people's attention to this is the story we're going with. Is there a bigger picture here? Another story, an underlying story that we are not seeing?
Well, here's the thing, and I think there is, because otherwise there wouldn't be redacted.
You're exactly right.
So that's why they don't want that stuff out. Today it's like, the Kennedy assassination. RFK Jr. has said multiple times that his uncle and possibly even his father were, it was the first thing that Bobby Kennedy said to the head of the CIA when he met up with him after his brother was killed. And he goes, were you guys involved? Was this you guys? It was like the first thing. So it's like, that doesn't come out of nowhere. So it doesn't, and just a lot of these other, you can go conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat all day long, but the purpose to redact information is to protect either the sources or protect things, narratives that go against what they want to happen.
Well, you go back to the JFK. Okay, they were supposed to have released every bit of the JFK files, and they're refusing to do it. What's in there that they don't want people to see?
Exactly.
Why would you? How strange is it that this Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who releases Mickey Cohen, who is put into prison by the Kennedy brothers, who is also the one who heads up the assassination of the Kennedys when they're killed, when JFK is killed, he's the one who's assigned to head this investigation up. The person who kills, Oswald is Jack Ruby, who is friends with Mickey Cohen. You got Candy Barr, who sees Jack Ruby and Oswald come by her house right after they leave, coming out of Mexico. She recants her story. Oh, and because you recanted your story, the next thing that happens, you get pardoned by the governor of the state of Texas. That's why. And
what was his name? Wasn't he in the front passenger seat?
Yes, John Connolly. He was in the front seat with JFK. He also gets struck by this magic bullet that everybody talks about. Yeah. But so because, this is something Mickey Cohen had tried to do from the very beginning, before all of this ever started. Candy Barr gets in trouble, drug related, in Texas. He runs her out of the country into Mexico so she could, skip the charges because she was about to go to prison.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now she comes back, and lo and behold, he gets this in the end. He gets what he was trying to do in the very beginning, is to have her pardoned, and all this occurs, and I don't know, it's like you said, I don't have a tinfoil on my head.
Hey, listen, it's the beginning of the deep. It's the beginning of the deep state.
Deep dive.
I'm just saying, they're so strange. There's so much strange things around the after part of this escape.
Yeah. I just want to jump in real quick because I know our time is pretty much over. I just want to tell two really fast stories about, again, what happened right after the escape. Whitey Bulger tells Ken that Charles German, Herman the German, took the escape really hard. He was really blaming himself, and of course the warden was blaming him. And Whitey Bulger said that they were just ribbing him to death. They were really making fun of him and telling him, you're not going to be an officer. Your career is over as a guard. You just might as well quit now. And they were just on and on and on after him. And because he was really taking it hard, it was under his watch that this happened. And the second thing is, there was a guy who wrote a folk song called "A Mile and a Quarter" some weeks or months after the escape. And it's a song about the escape because it's a mile and a quarter to freedom. And the inmates had radios in their cells that they can listen to music. And whenever that song would go on, they'd turn up the music so all the guards could hear it. And the guards would get really mad and yell at them and tell them to shut it up and, turn that off. We don't want to hear it. Because, again, the inmates were going after the guards about the escape. So, it's like for once in their lives, the inmates had an advantage over the guards. They had the power when it came to the escape because, it's like Ken had said before, they all escaped that night.
Yeah.
And they just, whenever they could, they just let the guards know about the escape. And there's nothing the guards can do about it. It was like,
nope.
It's like in your face.
Yeah. Right. And they just get mad and tell them to shut up and they didn't want to hear it. It just really got to them that this had actually happened. And it was.
Do you guys have a copy of that song?
You can go, it's on YouTube. You can listen to it on YouTube. It's called "A Mile and a Quarter."
Mile and a Quarter. We'll have to look for that. And we'll put
I'm going to send you, which I've never shared, just Mike and myself have ever seen this memo that I got from Marshall Dykes, which talks about the raft. I'll send you a copy of it.
Oh,
that would be great.
And you can put it on the podcast.
Okay, great.
I've had people ask me about it, and I've never shared it before.
Fantastic.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, till next week.
Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and check out extra content from all of our podcasts. All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content.